Hello and welcome to TAD Summit Asia. So today I'm going to be presenting on the open source telecom software landscape. Now, in the CX tech landscape I presented earlier, I covered some of the gaps that I see in Asia that are resulting in the sort of multi-billion-dollar revenue gap in CX tech. So this will hopefully provide some education around the open source telecom landscape and some ideas on where this can be adopted to make money for entrepreneurs across Asia in CX tech. So let's get down to it. Now, I want to provide a little bit of context and a few definitions before we get into running through the landscape. So first of all, open source software is important, regardless of the industry you're in. Now, open source software has its source code released under a license that grants the users the rights to study, change, and distribute the software to anyone for any purpose. It's a great example of open collaboration. And open source software, or OSS, underpins the web. 82% of web servers run on open source software, principally Apache and Nginx. Now, open source software became mainstream in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and you're going to see that date pop up time and time again as I review some of these projects. Now, most of the telecom communication innovations that have happened over the past 2 decades have come from open source software. And it's also the future of our industry. So, I mean, the benefits of it being free, I mean, it's great, but that's almost tertiary compared to the impact it's had to date and is going to have across the telecommunications industry. Now, I do want to make some key points that open source telecom software or communication software is a global community of communities. You're going to see that. I'm going to show some landscapes that show the different projects and how they cooperate. There's common people across the projects, and they have a range of different objectives. So when you're looking at open source telecom software, it's not just one project, it's a number of projects to consider. And it is almost everywhere. 80% of CX tech companies rely on open source telecom software for their core functionality. It really has revolutionized telecommunications or enterprise communications. Some of the projects overlap, and that enables a degree of competition. First of all, it shows the health of the open source telecom software industry, that it's not just monopolies. There actually are a couple of options, which is good for the overall ecosystem. Now, there are barriers to entry in using open source software, and they can be significant. Hence the role a range of service providers play across the communication platform as a service providers, unified communication as a service, contact center as a service, and of course, all the providers of on-prem, hosted, and all the variations of those options. Next generation telcos, infrastructure vendors, integrators, value-add resellers, and managed service providers all can help enterprises in taking advantage of open source telecom software, making it far more broadly available. And even enterprises can easily adopt these technologies themselves, but there's an important opportunity cost curve. I'm going to explain that later in this presentation on whether you should be doing it yourself or looking to a partner to help you in managing the open source software that you use in your enterprise. So these are just some of the key points, and I'm going to come back to them at the end, but I think it's important context. Now, here's the landscape. So, and it's just some of the projects. So we've got the telecom app servers and the SIP routers at the bottom here. So Asterisk, of course, is sort of granddaddy of many of these projects. Camailio OpenSIPs are SIP routers. FreeSWITCH is sort of competitive with Asterisk, as is Dratio, so is RESTCOM. But again, they've all got slightly different focus and slightly different histories. I'm going to run through and explain that over the next half hour. They're also, I've put at the top here, and I hope you can see them and the video isn't blocking them out. Node-RED is a really interesting project. I'm seeing many CX tech players adopt that. Matrix, you should consider in any of your projects where openness and decentralization is important, and Yate. And again, it's slightly tangential, but it still is within the remit of what we cover at TAD Summit. So as you can see, there's lots of projects. I'm going to help you understand most of them, or where it gets a little complex, for example, around WebRTC, the most popular ones. Now, I don't expect you to read the slide, but this is for your reference after the presentation. So it shows the project, the custodian, the guardian, who looks after the project, and a brief description of the project itself. So that's a little bit of background. Now I'm going to run through three main sections. I'm going to do some important definitions. Some of it's a little cheeky, but it's important to understand the issues, what to consider when you're looking at open source telecom software. And I'm going to run through the projects, and you can dip in, dip out of that section. And I'm going to wrap it all up on why it's important to Asia, yet it's still very early days. Open source telecom software is very important in Asia. It's going to enable you to achieve price points that make sense in your country, rather than having some North American price points forced on you for enterprise software. Now, on the definitions, an important point to realize is what I call the autistic savant. Now, autistic savant is someone with autism who is also extraordinary in their knowledge or ability. I show here an example of Steve in Wiltshire, who can just see a picture for a few minutes and then reproduce it in amazing accuracy. Now, when we take this to software, what that means is you can have an individual or a small team that can produce what would take a large, highly skilled and well-managed team to produce. So when you look at open source software and think, oh, it's just a couple of software geeks. No, these are people that can produce amazing quality software in a tiny fraction of the time that a lot of major corporations could ever hope to achieve. Now, these people are happiest when they're coding and solving complex code, environment, protocol problems that for most of us, we would never be able to solve. And they can think about it for a few minutes, a few hours, and come out with a solution. So that's what makes them happy. They're unhappiest when answering questions from people who don't understand their documentation. So that I just highlight so you understand the skills, the type of people at the heart of these projects, but also why you either need in-house or through a partner expertise that can interface to these projects. Now, another key issue with open source projects is there's a balancing act between the needs of the community and all the stuff that they want and the commercial needs of the core team or the custodian. Now, yeah, there is a dynamic there, and we're all human. Mistakes will be made. Now, one of the great things is there are open source software advocates. So you're going to be hearing from Fred Posner. He's part of the team from Kama-Ilio, and he's a very important open source telecom software advocate. And he calls out where he sees things being done in a way that aren't necessarily in the best interests of the community. So that's just an example. But mistakes will be made. But when they start to become systematic, that's when things start to fall apart. And what happens is there's then lots of forking. Now, what that means is, say I'm a contact center provider, I'm using a particular telecom app server project, and they do stuff that I'm just not getting the updates that I need, or they're now moving to a very commercial model that's making it impossible to not have to take some expensive commercial licenses. And then, okay, I've got the code base, it's working. I'm now going to own, manage, maintain, and run that forward. So they then fork the project. So they've got an instance and they're going to do their own patches and developments and improvements. And they may make it open source. But that's just to say that, you can never kill an open source project. You can only basically fork it. So hopefully that helps you understand some of the dynamic there between the community and the guardian or the custodian. And the other is a very important analogy. And this is part of why we see such broad adoption of open source projects in telecoms, is the analogy between the web server and the telecom app server. So I show here, you've got a client, a browser. Here's the web server that serves the web pages. It could be Amazon.com's web server, and it gathers together data and services from many, many different processes, databases, and presents you with your version of the Amazon.com homepage. Now, when we look at the telecom app server, it's actually very similar. You've got a client, it could be a phone, it could be a browser, a whole range of different things. And then you've got this app server, and that goes out and deals with all the telecom protocols, all the stuff over the internet, and brings all these data and services together to provide your communication services. So they're actually quite analogous, and the importance of open source in these projects, in these servers, is equally as important. Now, let me give you some context to understand how those telecom app servers fit in the broader CX tech landscape. We have the carrier aggregation services. So you've got the PSTN down here, and you've got all the companies that aggregate your SMS or your voice so that you can deal with one company rather than having to deal with 200, 300 different companies around the world. Over the internet, of course, it's a little bit simpler, but there you've got session border controller or firewall. You've then got telecom app servers for sort of voice and messaging and all the sort of telco PSTN related stuff, SIP application server, web RTC application server gateway. Generally, these converge onto just one application server, but I'm just sort of breaking it up so you understand the different flows. On top of that are all the value-added services. So these are the bots, speech rec, media forking, push to talk, mobile payments, SIP value-added services. Then there's API management. If you're going to expose this as an API to either your customers or to the public, if you're a CPaaS provider, then you've got all the enablers. So this is the contact centers, the UC, all the sort of enterprise services that sit on top of that can be provided as a service. But guess what? Are all running on telecom app servers. So this underlies all of the CX tech market. And of course, there's all your common functions, management, billing, all the rest of it. Just include that for completeness. So this hopefully helps you understand why these building blocks are fundamental to the CX tech industry. Now, I'm also, through this presentation, going to be sharing some survey responses. Now, this is from last year, May, June. We had about 95 people respond, giving their views around a lot of questions. And I'm going to do that just so it helps you understand how people feel about the projects, how they're using the projects, to make it more than just Alan Quayle's opinion, so you get to see some quantification. And what I want to emphasize is this is just my perspective, okay? I'm sure it's very easy to disagree with me, but hopefully it provides you with some very important landscapes and signposts to help you understand the importance of open source telecom software to CX tech across Asia. So now let's jump into the different projects. I'm going to kick off with Asterisk. So this was founded in 1999 by Mark Spencer of Digium. This is the oldest open source telecom app server project. Mark is the original geek. Others may claim to be, but Mark is. The second oldest was OpenCloud, founded in April 2000 by David Ferry and David Page. Another is MobiSense, that was created in 2004 by Evelyn Ivanov. And I've worked with all these people over the years in helping them. Now, there have been tens of open source projects over the years, hundreds of proprietary telecom app servers stretching back into the 1970s. In fact, some of my Ericsson friends claim it was even further back into the 1960s. They were doing stuff around telecom app servers. So it's had a long history. But of course, as I mentioned, as we got into the late 90s, early 2000s, this is really when we saw a flourishing of open source telecom projects. Now, Sangoma is the custodian for this project. Now, what it means is you've now got some stability and security around the project. And Asterisk is so much more than an enterprise class PBX. Some people label it as that. That's misleading you. It's an open source platform for building real-time communication applications from, yes, a simple office phone system all the way through to some of the most complex communication platforms on the planet. It has the largest and most diverse community, and they are presenting at TAD Summit Asia. So we're going to be hearing from them, which is really great. Here's their architecture. I'm not going to spend time really going through this. It was just to say, here are the Asterisk components. Then, it sort of runs on a local OS, or it could be, this could be running in the cloud. It could be running on-prem. It's hybrid. So you can use it in the form that works for you because of operational needs, regulatory needs. It's not, a cloud solution. It's software that you can use in many different ways. And of course, interacts with all the hardware and networks that you would expect for communications. Now to the survey. These are the projects that we were asking people, do they use them? Do they know about them? Asterisk, of course, was the most popular. So this is just to give you a feel for the popularity of the different projects that are out there. And because of its age, because of its broad set of applications, this is what you'd expect for Asterisk. Also, it gets used across a whole range of applications. And also, you can see it scales to large deployments. Now, that's done in conjunction with Quayle and OpenSIP. So I'm going to explain how they work together. So it's important to look at, when you're looking at some of these applications, it's very much a number of projects, open source projects being used together. And then what do people see as the project's strengths and weaknesses? Strengths, reliability, flexibility, community, maturity. People are running the business on these projects. You need to be confident that it's going to do what you need and it's going to be round for a considerable period of time. And there's enough people with the necessary skills to help you. Again, it takes time to build that level of maturity. And of course, we're open. It's both strengths and weaknesses. And we captured some of them here. Now let's look at the Asterisk project community. You've got Asterisk, but there are many other projects it works with very often. So I show here Oiseau. This is an open source project to build a carrier-grade programmable IP communications infrastructure. They're initially focused on unified communications and CPaaS, communication platform as a service, and think of it as a project that helps you stitch together all the other projects. There's VC Dial. Now that's an enterprise class open source call center suite so that you can build your own call center using Asterisk. There's Elastics, which is a unified communications wrap. There's several instances. I'll provide some more information later. Of course, FreeBBX, which is the GUI that controls and manages Asterisk. So that's its own project. There's an Asterisk, which of course is the granddaddy of projects here. We've got Homer, which has a SIP capture system and monitoring application, and that's by QuickSIP. That's the company that produces it. So this is for monitoring of the SIP, excuse me, calls. And you've got a big call center or a big communications application with lots of traffic flowing through, trying to work out what's going on. Sometimes when you've got an issue, it's complex. Homer is one of them. SIP3 is for real-time comms and VoIP traffic monitoring and analysis. So again, you see that used quite often. And again, they're built into some of these projects. Quayle is the SIP server for SIP services such as SIP proxy, SIP presence server, SIP location server. Think of it as a highly scalable front end of any communication infrastructure. This does the load balancing, it does the routing, so that you can route off calls, services to a number of Asterisk instances. And OpenSIPs is very similar. So that hopefully gives you a feel for the community. There's people that hop between many of these projects that contribute across the projects. Now, we're really fortunate that we'll be hearing from Fred Posner of Kama-Ilio at TED Summit Asia. Now, this project started back in 2001. It was called back then the SIP Express Router, SIR, and it was a project by the Focus Research Institute in Berlin. Now, as I mentioned, it's a core building block of most VoIP infrastructure. And this is just to give you a view of all the different applications that exist there. But Fred's going to go into it in far better detail. This is from the survey that I ran last year, gives you a feel for all the different applications. And as you can see here, it's used in big scale deployments, because that's what it does. It enables any telecom app server to be able to run at scale, because it provides the highly scalable front end, also provides the sort of protection against bad actors. And again, Fred's going to be providing much more information on that project. You can see it's got, as a community, lots of strengths there. And in fact, I share with you, and these are just to show some questions around how they view the community. And this is just to show just how well managed Kama-Ilio is. There's a lot of love. And I always use Kama-Ilio as an archetype for how to run a successful open source project. There's clear separation between the community and the commercial interests. So they've done a very good job there. Now, OpenSIPs, this gives you, here's SIR back in 2001. Then there was OpenSIR Kama-Ilio, and then OpenSIPs is a fork from OpenSIR. That happened around 2008, 2009. Now, again, we're really fortunate that Bogdan Andrei, who's the leader of the OpenSIPs project, he's going to be presenting at TED Summit Asia, so you can get to understand the latest of what they've just released. So we're very fortunate to hear from him. Again, very similar functions to Kama-Ilio, but there is some divergence between the projects. But again, this is a great thing. We have two projects that are similar. It gives you some choice there. So when you're using telecom, open source telecom software, you're not trapped into a monopoly. That's a great thing. Now, I mentioned Oiseau. This is a relatively young project compared to the ones I've covered to date. This was founded in 2016. It's actually a fork from Xevo and was created by the core dev team for Xevo, and that includes Savant. And this is founded on the principles of hybrid, because they saw, it's not just cloud. You need on-prem, and quite often you need it to work together. So again, they've got this hybrid approach, and it's an open platform with some very powerful scripting. And as you can see in the diagram here on the right, it's built using Asterisk, Kama-Ilio, and RTP engine. So this enables you to stitch together these projects using Oiseau. Now, their focus at the moment is unified communications and communication platform as a service, but really it can be used for any real-time communication project. And just to highlight, these are some videos, and there's got the links there from TED Summit 2017, 2018, and 2019, where you can hear about what they've been getting up to at Oiseau. And it's great to compare those three presentations as you see the evolution of the project, the growth, and the team. Now, as VC Dial, this project began in 2004 because it costs millions of dollars to buy commercial outbound dialing solutions for a 200-seat call center, and Asterisk was available. So that's from the founder of the project, Matt, how he described how VC Dial became into existence. The group was formed in about 2007 that provided the professional products and services around the user community. And it's an open source contact center that has 14,000 registered installations in over 100 countries. So again, it's got a lot of really cool capabilities, including web user interfaces, handling inbound, outbound, blended call handling. So it is a full-featured call center that you can basically build on top of Asterisk. Again, I just referring to the survey. We think that this project would only be niche, but in the survey we had 7 people that have experience in using VCDAL. So it's great to see that even relatively small open source projects such as VCDAL have lots of use. Now, as I mentioned, FreePBX, this is the GUI that manages Asterisk. Now, this project is within Sangoma, which is good because then Sangoma is managing 2 closely related projects and ensuring the stability and continuity. And it's really, it's a community of developers and contributors who devote their work to making complicated phone systems as easy to use as possible. So it really is a great tool. Elastics was created by Palo Santo Solutions in Ecuador back in 2006, and it's a UC server. So it stitches together several different projects. They have a couple of implementations. So Elastics 2.5 is the Asterisk-based one. They also have Asterisk 5, which is a 3CX project. We're not covering that. Then SIP3, which is RTC VoIP traffic monitoring. This is Konstantin and Oleg have this project. And again, it's very important when you've got highly, so high volume deployment, trying to work out, what's happening to the traffic when you're seeing errors, and when you're trying to basically look at some of the reports. So again, very useful tools, and they were established in 2016. Homer. Now remember, engineers love to name things, so you're going to get lots of names here. So QuickSIP is a Dutch R&D company that specializes in open source and commercial voice technology. SIP Capture is an open source community primarily sponsored by QuickSIP. SIP Capture Homer is based on their encapsulation protocol, and it's used by lots and lots of players in the market for basically monitoring their SIP calls. And it's natively implemented on most of the major VoIP platforms such as Elio, OpenSIPs, FreeSWITCH, Asterisk, OpenUC, and many tools as well. And there's value there in what Homer's doing, because, for example, CallStats.io was recently acquired by 8x8, and they were doing a very similar thing in the sort of pure play of the WebRTC space. So let's move on to a competitive telecom app server. So we have FreeSWITCH. FreeSWITCH project was announced in 2006. Its first official release was May 2008. Twilio initially used Asterisk as its telecom app server. It then moved over to FreeSWITCH when it hit scalability issues, and has since built out its own telecom application infrastructure because it has challenges working with open source. It's sort of a cultural thing. Now, FreeSWITCH achieved broad adoption because it took an API-centric approach. When it wasn't clear what Asterisk was going to do, Asterisk has since caught up. So, there's more competition between these 2 projects. They're not interchangeable, but it's good that there's competition there. Now, SignalWire was founded in 2008 to provide a commercial cloud telecom services using FreeSWITCH. So they provide now the permanent commercial sponsor for the open source project FreeSWITCH, because they bought from the founders of FreeSWITCH Solutions. So SignalWire owns FreeSWITCH Solutions, which is the open source project. So let's look at the FreeSWITCH community. So you've got FreeSWITCH there, and there's a number of other players, some of which we've already covered. So like you saw with Wazo, Kazoo is an open source project to build carrier-grade programmable IP communication infrastructure. And that is the commercial entity is 2600 Hertz. The open source project is Kazoo. Fusion PBX is the GUI for FreeSWITCH. We've already just mentioned FreeSWITCH. And then these people here with Homer, SIP3, Elio, and OpenSIPs are all, again, used in conjunction with FreeSWITCH in lots of different deployments. So as mentioned, this is the GUI. It's an open project that provides a customizable and flexible web interface. So it makes it just very much, it makes it easier to use. It is relatively North American centric. And that's the one thing I'd say of this ecosystem. With Kazoo, again, it's based on FreeSWITCH, Gamma Elio. Guardian is 2600 hertz, which was founded in 2010. I became aware of Kazoo in about 2014 when they did KazooCon. Strong engineering team, but it's relatively small. It's mostly based in North America, but they do have some very solid accounts that pay the bills. And they do have some community members across Europe and Russia. But if I was to say, it is the region where it dominates, it's mainly North American biased. So that covers some of the community that's out there. Let's have a look at WebRTC. Again, I'm going to jump to the survey. There's lots of different WebRTC projects. I'm just going to focus on two because they are, stand out as the most popular: JANUS and Jitsi. JANUS is a general purpose WebRTC server developed by Michio, and they were founded in 2009 in Napoli. So this server implements the means to set up WebRTC media communications with the browser, exchanging JSON messages, relaying all the sort of protocols that you'd expect. So you've got the browser, this is the core, and then they have these plugins where you can then add in other functionality like conferencing, like sort of Jitsi I'll mention on the next slide, set gateways, media recorders, all that good stuff. So they've got a great project that just abstracts away the WebRTC complexity. Now, I'm going to do a WebRTC status review in another presentation, so that'll help you appreciate the complexity that this great project is abstracting. Now, Jitsi, this was previously called SIP Communicator. It started in 2003 by Emil as a student project. He then founded BlueJimp in 2009 and employed most of the Jitsi main contributors. BlueJimp was bought in 2015, and then 8x8 took over the project and is now the project sponsor. Now, they've got a whole host of really cool stuff. One of the interesting ones is Jitsi Meet, which is a video conferencing server with end-to-end encryption. So we've seen several services being launched recently, like Simwood Meet, that uses Jitsi Meet. Now, just to mention a few other projects, because it's important to understand that projects can have their ups and downs. So the code for RESTCOM is up on GitHub, so I've got the link there. Now, it used to be on mobisense.org, rescom.org, but they all now redirect to Telestacks, because Telestacks used to manage RESTCOM or mobisense. It's sort of the same name, different names for the same project, but they no longer focus that as their business. So mobisense is an open source VoIP platform written in Java to help create, deploy, manage services. It's got a ton of telco protocols in there as well, so it does a hell of a lot. It was founded in 2004 by Evelyn. Red Hat bought it in 2007. Then Red Hat sunsetted the project in 2011, and then Telestacks was founded, took over leadership and the commercial services around mobisense. Now they've raised cash, about over 8 million in 2015, 17, and 18. Evelyn left in 2019, left Telestacks, that is. As I mentioned, Telestacks are no longer supporting RESTCOM. But I do this so you understand that things change over time. So don't take the landscape that I'm showing as written in stone, that what is here will always be. I use this to show that when basically projects raise VC money, they have the VCs to keep happy. But there's always new stuff coming up, which is great. One to watch is Dratio. This is promoted by Dave Horton in 2018. Project's been around since 2013, but really 2018, I started to notice it. I had people pointing me to it. It's an open source SIP application. It consists of a high performance, easily configurable SIP server written in C++, and then a Node.js framework. So it's very interesting for web developers to be able to do stuff with it. And the word dratio means to sip or to drink lustily. So just so you understand the background, but keep an eye on this one. And again, the great thing is we have Dave Horton presenting on dratio at TAD Summit Asia. So you'll learn about this new exciting project. Now, Matrix is an interesting project and you should keep it on your radar. It's an open standard for interoperable, decentralized, real-time communications over IP. It's an open standard, there's the Matrix specification. It's designed to interoperate with any other communication system because it's open. There's the spec. So you can build your own gateway, and many gateways have been built up over the years. It's decentralized, so there's no central point of control. You can host your own server and keep your own data to yourself. It's designed to function in real time, so it can be used for instant messaging and a whole host of real-time communication services. Now, it was founded by Matthew and Amadine back in 2014. Now, that was within Amdocs. It's spun out now of Amdocs, and they've raised $5 and $8.5 million in 2017 and 2019. Now, what's really interesting is the French government have selected them as their messaging platform in 2018. Then the German Ministry of Defense in 2019, because it's private, it's secure, end-to-end encryption, it's decentralized. And then, and this is a big one, in 2020, Mozilla announced they would replace IRC with Matrix. So if openness, if decentralization is important in any of your plans, you've got to include Matrix in there. Then just a couple more projects I want to mention. Node-RED is a flow-based development tool for visual programming. It generally started on IoT, but I'll be honest with you, I see lots and lots of CX tech companies using it for building services. Again, it's open sourced. IBM contributed it to the JS Foundation back in 2016. So this one, it's a great tool. And in fact, I'll just share with you, back in March, we ran TADHack-mini Orlando, and there was a Node-RED hack from Sam Machin, who works for Vonage, Nexmo, and he was building Node-RED Asterisk. It was a great hack. Again, you've got the links there to be able to see and read about what Sam created. It's a great tool, very easy to use. I mentioned YATE for completeness. YATE stands for Yet Another Telephony Engine. Founded in 2004 by Null Team SS7ware. And it's focused more on enabling open RAN, open mobile networks. So they've sort of gone not so much the enterprise route, they've gone into sort of telco networks. But again, and we do cover this in TAD Summit over the years, but I just highlight that as it's an interesting project that potentially, could, have a significant impact as we see more and more spectrum being allocated to, not to telcos. So we might see this project really start to come into its own through the next decade. So that's some of the projects. I haven't included most of them, but hopefully that's given you a feel for the rich ecosystem that's out there, that they're being used at scale all around the world. But I see Asia as underperforming compared to other regions. So, as I mentioned at the start, open source software is important. It's what the web is built on. It's now mainstream, and most of the innovation we've seen over the past 2 decades in telecoms, communications, is because of open source software. And it's really will define the future of the communications, the telecoms industry. So it should be part. If you're in communications and you're not taking advantage of these projects, you're at a competitive disadvantage. Now, as an enterprise, you can use these projects, and lots of enterprises do, but there's a cost, because when you're small and you're trying to burn as least cash as possible, saving, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands on your communication infrastructure it's a, that saving helps you, in terms of burning less cash, and you can afford the time to do it. But as your business grows, as you become far more focused on getting more revenue in the door, then you might find the trade-off in terms of time. It's better I spend my time earning on my core revenue, and I have a partner to help me on managing this. So it's just to say, this is an opportunity cost curve that I see lots of enterprises go through, in that over time, the cost saved, can be less than the revenue foregone, because it's not your core business. You're trying to remember the passwords. You're trying to remember, because you've not been tracking how to do basically, one of the upgrades, and you're just getting frustrated because you've not been doing it for months. While, your core business, that's what you're focusing on all the time. So this is an important thing to be aware of when you do adopt open source technology over time. So just some key points. And again, it's a global community of communities. And I hope I've shown you the different ecosystems that are out there. And you use multiple projects. It's not just one project, it's multiple projects. And this whole CX tech landscape I showed, 80% of those are built on open source. And there's some competition, and I hope I've given you a flavor of where some of the projects overlap, and that's great. That's a testament to the success of open source telecom software, that you've got multiple players out there. There are barriers to entry. These aren't easy to use projects. I mean, some are more easy than others, don't get me wrong. Asterisk with free PBX does make it pretty easy these days. But there are a whole host of players out there that can help you take advantage of the benefits that open source brings. And one of the other key points I want to stress, I gave you the RESTCOM example, but this is a landscape that's evolving. SignalWire could struggle in its evolution from coders to being service providers. So you might see that project come, sort of change its focus. Sangoma could face pressure from shareholders given the current, an emerging recession, and where it invests during the downturn. So again, that landscape is as it is, but these changes are true for any software company out there today. Now, when we focus in on Asia, to be honest, Asia is best served by large, well-established projects. So Asterisk, Quayle, OpenSIPs, they're well-proven. They have a focus in Asia, and you can even see who's using those projects in Asia. Now, you'll need either in-house or external expertise. That is potentially an engineering team that can fork and maintain a project. Now, one of the great things is the diversity of the Asian market is ideal for open source. It enables local engineers, local entrepreneurs to craft these projects to price points and functionality that meet the needs of local business. And this I see as a major gap in Asia, is this open source telecom project expertise in some of the value-added resellers and managed service providers, meeting the needs of small, medium, and mid-market enterprises. So, if I look at, say, Indonesia, I see a gap in, the number of ours MSPs that are using these projects for enterprises, because they can craft price points that are just so far below what a lot of the big global players are, which are just trying to apply the expensive North American price points to the Indonesian or the Malaysian, Vietnamese, or Cambodian markets. I think this gap can be closed through education. That's what I'm trying to do with this presentation, what we're trying to do with TED Summit Asia, and also networking. That's why we have Asterisk, so Quayle, OpenSIPs, Draccio presenting, so you can meet and listen to the people running these projects, get in touch with them, get to know them, help them understand what you're trying to do, and help Asia more broadly adopt open source telecom software. And just to close out, back to this CX tech gap I see in Asia, it's all about the VoIP channel, because every country in Asia is different. When I look at Japan, it has a long established enterprise channel infrastructure. However, it's closely tied to the incumbent telcos. Back to this issue I see of this assumption that telecoms and telcos are, you can only get your telecom services from telcos. That is not the case anymore. It's not been for over a decade. And this is, meant that, because of the vested interests of the vendors, they've been slow to adopt open source. So when I look at the Japanese market, it really is quite underperformed compared to a lot of other markets as advanced in the use of open source software. Now, there are issues, don't get me wrong. Most of the open source projects are only in English language. And that's partly why we see more rapid adoption of open source software in Australia, New Zealand, India, Singapore. There is a need for greater language localization, but that's possible. When I look at, for example, South Korea, there's a great community around WebRTC in South Korea, again, because they've done a lot of language localization to help more and more people understand the technology. And when I attend AstriCon, there are small organizations, small businesses of 5, 10, or 15 people that are delivering the communication needs of car dealerships, factories, supermarkets, restaurants, many other small, medium businesses using open source software. And for most of these businesses, they don't have an IT department. What they need is a local person or business they can trust that makes it easy for them. Hence, the need for OSS education, this presentation, and to contact the communities. Because I think, it's that local trust and making it easy. And this is what open source enables you to do. You're able to build something that meets the needs of the local businesses at the price points that they need to see, not the price points of large North American enterprises. And I always point back to this, that most people, businesses are frugal. That is, saving money matters more than long lists of features. So just because somebody is in the top quadrant of some analyst's matrix, I'd almost say for many businesses, that means they're irrelevant because they're going to be too expensive and have too much stuff that they're wanting you to pay for that you're never going to use. So hopefully this has given you a feel for the open source telecom landscape. It's mature, it's 20 years old. You have governments, you have most of the CX tech landscape running on this software. It is a dynamic market. There's new stuff coming online. Some of the existing projects, you have to be prepared in terms of what may happen in the future. But that's why having partners, having this VoIP channel, that is local integrators, local managed service providers that can help enterprises take advantage of these projects at price points that make sense in the country that it's created. And of course, we'll keep the revenue within those countries as well. So hopefully you found this interesting. Again, if you've got any questions, please just contact me. Thank you and goodbye.